back to Afghanistan, and I think I use the term back very intentionally. So even though this is the third time I will be going in my entire life, but for some reason Afghanistan has always felt like home to me. And logically it doesn't really make sense. I wasn't brought up there. We left when I was 2. I've been in London since I was 2. So I don't really have a reason to be saying going back to Afghanistan. Something about being from there, it's almost like your soul recognizes it. Like every time I'm on my flight from Dubai to Kabul, there's this thing that I feel in my chest, and it's kind of like, we're going home. Like this excitement, there's this pull, there's this all-encompassing feeling. And every time I get off that plane and that humidity and that heat hits my face, it's almost like I enjoy it. It genuinely feels like my homeland. And then at the same time, I think Afghanistan brings up so many complicated emotions. The joy, it's grief, it's love, it's heartbreak, it's pride, guilt, confusion, belonging, and at some point also just not belonging at all. And I think this is something that a lot of the diaspora will probably relate to. You spend so much of your childhood in particular being told that this is where you're from. But when you go back there, the people turn around and they kind of tell you that's not where you're from. In the UK, I'm visibly Afghan. I am visibly Muslim, and I am other in so many different spaces. But then I go back to Afghanistan and I am also Khariji Gak, the little foreigner. And sometimes they say it as a joke, and sometimes they say it in like a really loving manner, and sometimes they just say it out of curiosity. Like I'll literally go into a shop and they're like, Khariji Gak, where are you from? And it still triggers me. Like it still lands somewhere where it hurts. Like I grew up thinking I'm Afghan. Afghanistan is my home, these are my people. And then I go there and they can tell from the way I speak, the way I dress, the way I hold myself, the way I interact. Everything about me apparently is obvious that I am a foreigner or I didn't grow up there. And then the question is, who am I? And I think I've struggled with my identity for so long, because where do I actually belong? Am I Afghan? Am I British? Am I both? Am I neither? And I think for such a long time, this genuinely used to like break my heart, like not knowing where I belong, not knowing who I was, not knowing who my people were. And I wanted a full, clean, easy, simple answer. And I just wanted to like fully belong somewhere. And I think now in this age, after all of my healing and all of that, I can accept that my identity is messy. I am Afghan, I am British, I am Muslim, I live between these two worlds. I've always lived between Afghanistan from afar and the UK where I currently reside. And maybe I don't need to fit into a box. Maybe I don't need to be Afghan or British. Maybe I can be an amalgamation and be a bit of both. And I think every time I go to Afghanistan, it's almost like it forces me to deal with all of these identity conflicts I have internally. Another thing I really struggle with when it comes to Afghanistan is probably a difficult conversation to have, because a lot of people get defensive or like political and uncomfortable, but this is just me from my experiences. Every time I've gone previously, I have decided not to talk about it publicly until I'm back. And I think part of that is out of fear of being judged. I know a lot of the diaspora understandably have reservations when it comes to people traveling to Afghanistan given the current situation. I've always sort of been embarrassed to admit that I've gone, because I feel like going to Afghanistan in the current situation is seen as accepting the situation and is seen as being okay with the current situation. And I think sitting with it and trying to understand why I feel this particular way, it's just reminded me of like how much I am a people pleaser and how much I need to work on this. And the truth is, the two things can coexist. I can go out to Afghanistan and do the charity work that we go for the intention of, and still at the same time disagree with everything that's happening. Disagree with the lack of rights that women have and the lack of progression that women and girls and everyone is allowed or entitled to, or the restrictions that they have placed on the country and women in particular. The two things can coexist, but it's almost like I have this guilt. If people know that I've gone, they're now going to think that I agree because I have gone. And accepting that within myself, that I know fundamentally that is not what I believe, and being okay with people viewing it like that. Someone like me traveling with a foreign passport in my back pocket is very different to someone who lives there. From my own experience traveling there, I personally have not had any restrictions. It's unfair. I accept that. But it's also the reality. There's a lot of places that women aren't allowed to go to, but I can go because I have a foreign passport. But my family can't come with me because they don't. I think it's important for me to be honest about what my personal experience has been, and rather than pretending I have the same situation as everyone living there. And me going for charity intentions is not with the intention of validating things. But I think something aside from that, something that I've always struggled with emotionally is how much Afghanistan requires me to change and soften parts of myself. Not because someone tells me directly, and I think that's the important thing, like no one tells me directly to change myself, but it's almost because like socially or like culturally and the environment, it feels so different to who I naturally am. Like in the UK, especially around people I'm comfortable with, I'm loud. I am expressive, I'm passionate, I laugh loudly, I speak loudly, I take up space. Do you know what I mean? I take up space. And then when I go to Afghanistan, it's almost like I become a very different version of myself. I become so over-aware. I'm very aware about how I speak, how I dress, how I sit, how I talk, who I talk to, how much eye contact, how much I move my hands, how animated I am, and how much of my personality is allowed to come through, how much I enjoy the music, how much everything I do. I am so aware of it. And I think it's because I grew up in the West, where I naturally am going to be very different to people who grew up in Afghanistan. And sometimes I feel like I have to change myself to fit in. And I have to become a quieter, softer, lighter, less expressive version of me to fit into the environments that I'm in. Because that is what is acceptable. And I think that is something that I have always struggled with internally, because part of me understands and it respects the cultural differences, but I think the other part of me really struggles with the concept of my authentic self being too much for different environments, like being too loud, being too opinionated, expressive, too passionate. And I think I've spent so much of my life trying to shrink myself to not take up space, or try and shrink myself to be more acceptable and make other people comfortable. And it's like, especially in this stage of my life where I had spent so long trying to find this version of me again, it's definitely something I am nervous about when it comes to going back, because I don't want to shrink myself to fit in. So anyway, I guess I am trying to work out what the balance is, and I probably won't know until I get there. The balance between respecting social and cultural expectations of me while also not abandoning myself to fit in. I think it's just because I love the version of me that I have become. I love the version of me that I've spent so long trying to find again. Because it's taken me so long to get back here, I am concerned that Afghanistan is going to take that away from me. I feel that I am going to take that away from myself by changing myself to fit in. There's a lot of other emotions that come up for me when it comes to Afghanistan. I think grief plays a very big role in it. For me, Afghanistan is so deeply connected to my dad. And for those of you who know me, you know how much losing my dad has shaped my life. And it's changed everything about me. But it's also that Afghanistan carries his memory. I think I love Afghanistan, and I'm so passionate about being Afghan because of him. Afghanistan is that one place that I think of, and immediately the first thought that comes to my mind is my dad. And especially with the cultural differences of when I go to Afghanistan, people don't refer to me as Nadia. Like, they don't refer to me by name. They refer to me as like Dr. Qazi Saib, which is like the judge's daughter, because in Afghanistan you're referred to by your father's profession, which is a whole other thing. But it's like that is how I'm recognized. Like people, whether they know me, whether they don't know me, that is who they refer to me as. And I think it's so beautiful, but it's so painful. Like it's almost like I don't have an identity of my own, and you know me through my dad, which I have an issue with. I have this issue. This is going to be a whole other conversation. I have an issue of women being recognized through the men around them. But that aside, I think in terms of the grief frame, I think for me, it is so beautiful, but yet so painful, because it's beautiful to be reminded that people who haven't seen him for decades still remember him. But it's all, so that's the beauty side of it. But I think it's also painful for me to live and experience that when he's not there. For me, that's always been one of my biggest fears, that the further away we get from my dad's passing, the more the people will forget him, the more the world moves on naturally, the more the world moves on, and the more we forget about people because they're not in our day-to-day. And I think part of me is so concerned about keeping my dad and keeping my dad's name and keeping my dad's legacy alive, that it's kind of all encompassing. And I think when I go to Afghanistan, it's interesting because it's like the first time where I don't need to try and remind people of my dad. It's like it's almost like they talk to him through me. Like they tell me their stories, they tell me their memories of my dad, and then they talk about his character and like the way he was funny, apparently. Maybe that's where I get it from. But they talk about all of these moments that I never experienced, and all of these stories that I didn't know anything about. And even like sometimes the way they look at me, I remember there was a few gatherings I was sitting at, and like one of these older uncles was looking at me for a very long time, and then he turned around going, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I really hope I didn't make you uncomfortable. You just remind me of your dad," or like, "Your nose looks like your dad," or like, "The way you speak and the way you talk just reminds me of your dad." And I just felt like it was him for a moment. And I'm like, okay, I will take this as a compliment. And like genuinely, like part of me feels so honored. And I think people obviously show me a lot of love and show me a lot of respect. Bearing in mind, I have never met these people before in my life. I know Afghans generally were very hospitable people, but it's like so much beyond that. And I think part of me loves that the fact that people still remember him and treat his daughter kind of like I traveled to Afghanistan with him. I don't know if this makes sense, but it's almost like I walk into rooms that he obviously can't walk into because he's not here, and have these experiences almost like on his behalf, where people get to relive their experiences, people get to relive their memories with him through me. And it's almost like I am a doorway to their lost connection, to their lost sibling, to their lost friend. And it's like, it's so depressing, but it's so interesting and it's so beautiful at the exact same time. And I think when I go to Afghanistan, that's kind of what I do as well. Like I go to Afghanistan because I almost find parts of my dad that I didn't know myself, like his childhood, where he worked, where he lived, who his friends were, his siblings, his relationships, all of that. It's like all of this that my dad had before we were even here, before we spoke about it, before we moved to London, before we even existed as offspring. And I think a lot of that just means that I have become more in love with Afghanistan. And I think obviously with a lot of the conversations with my dad, like we used to always speak about this trip. We always used to speak about me going to Afghanistan with him, seeing the people he used to break bread with and seeing the people who made up his life. And he always used to say to me, "I'll take you." And this is something that I've always struggled to accept as well. Because every year, from a very young age, I was always promised to go to Afghanistan. From a very young age, every year my dad would say to me, "I'll take you. I will take you. This year we'll go to Afghanistan. This summer we'll go. I'll introduce you to this person. We'll eat this fruit. We'll have that. We'll go to this particular place. We'll go to this house. We'll go to that house." And I always held on to that, but he never took me to Afghanistan. And I think I really want to be honest about this because I know this conversation is more about Afghanistan rather than it is grief, but it's so interconnected. I think with this part of grief in my life, you can still hold on and love someone and still admit that they did do you wrong at times. Like, I adore my dad. I think everyone knows this and that's not even up for question. But I think what the false promises did to me affected me a lot more than I realized at the time. I think my dad in his heart knew that he wasn't going to go. But instead of him having the difficult conversation and just being like, Nadia, you know what? I know Afghanistan means a lot to you, but I don't want to go back. It's too painful for me. It's not safe, or it's traumatic, or I just can't be bothered. Like, whatever the reason was, he could have had that honest conversation and just be like, I don't want to go. And rather than doing that, he would always tell me, this year we'll go. This year will go. And I have to admit, I don't think it's malicious. I think part of him also wanted to believe that. Maybe he wanted his family to believe that. Maybe he thought it was him protecting me. Maybe he didn't know how to communicate. And I think so many of us don't know how to communicate. But what that did to me that I didn't realize until very recently is that it taught me that people you love or people who love you will let you down. People will love you and still avoid hard conversations and tell you what you want to hear just because honesty is uncomfortable. And I think that has followed me into so many different parts and so many different aspects of my life. Like, it's made me struggle a lot with people making me promises. Like, it's almost until I don't see it, I don't believe it. Like, there's no point making me a promise because until I don't see it, it's not going to happen. And I really struggle with people whose words don't match with their actions, because I would rather you tell me an uncomfortable and difficult truth than lie to me, just because it's more comforting. And I think me going to Afghanistan triggers so many different parts of me, because it's almost like I am fulfilling that promise that was made to me for myself. I am also fulfilling it without the person who made it to me. Like, I am having all of these experiences that I was promised that I never got. And it's almost like this toxic reminder to myself of, like, at the end of the day, the only person that's got me is me. And that's really sad to admit. The only person that will actually stick to everything they have ever said to themselves is me. And I think through a lot of my healing, I've realized that maybe this is why that is the mentality that I have, that the only person that I have truly got in my life is myself. And teaching myself to not automatically go to that mentality is taking a lot of work. But I am finally getting to a stage where I now know why I feel like that about people. It's difficult because my dad was a man of his word with everything except this. And I don't know whether it's that concept of, like, I don't know whether it's just because he was uncomfortable with the concept of accepting that he might never actually see his homeland, and it was a little bit easier for him to maybe almost like give himself false hope as well, not just me. So I think for me, for whatever reason, that genuinely really affected me. And I think that is why I struggle with relationships, friendships. That's why I struggle, because I don't believe people. I don't believe words. And through a lot of my healing, I'm starting to let people actually show up through their words that then are proven in their actions. Like, I am now surrounded by a lot of people who are exactly that. Like, their word matches exactly what they're going to say when it comes in relation to me. And I think for whatever reason, even though it was this only thing that his word didn't match his action, for whatever reason, it was enough in my life for me to then have that distrust. And I, like, once again, it's so interesting how we as humans choose one particular thing to have so much impact. Everything else he ever said, he did. Everything else he ever promised, he showed up. But this one thing, and it's probably because it meant so much to me, this one thing in my life that he promised and he never showed up is the one thing that has stuck with me. And it's almost altered my entire brain. And it's like constantly having to remind myself that maybe this was difficult for him. Maybe everything else about him showing up and his actions matching his words is who he was, and he just struggled to show up when it came to taking you to Afghanistan. I don't know, I'm still working on it. Like, grief is such an interesting and complicated emotion because it comes with so many ups and downs. It comes with this idea of, like, constantly wanting to hold on to the perfect version of this person, and then constantly reminding yourself to be honest about maybe some of the non-perfect imperfections that this person had, but also reminding you that the two things can coexist and you can still love and miss this person at the exact same time. But you know, aside from everything that it's done in terms of me in my day-to-day life, I think still experiencing Afghanistan without my dad is very difficult for me. Like seeing all the places that he said he would show me, or seeing and meeting all of his siblings and all of his family, and having all of the, even things as simple as having all of the fruit that we said we'd have together. It's bittersweet. And at the same time, doing all of the charity work and like Love United globally, it stems from my dad, from that ambition and that desire to give back. And it's almost like every time I do a project at the end of it and I'm like, Dad, that was for you. Like, it's almost like I sit there and I'm like, I wish you were here to see it in person. I wish you were here to actually experience how rewarding this entire thing that we had always spoken about actually is. Afghanistan brings up so many different emotions. It's genuinely the most emotional place for me in my life. And I think the other thing, aside from my dad and all of that, I think Afghanistan has seen so many different versions of me. And every time I go, a different version of me goes. Like the first time I went, it was like entirely about grief. It was entirely about grief. It was about the little girl in me who had always wanted to go and finally achieve this, because I did it for me and I wanted to understand what going to my watan and my homeland felt like. I wanted to see my people. I wanted to experience Afghanistan and I wanted to give back and I wanted to feel all of that. And that was like that version. And it's like almost like every time I go back, I come back a different version too. And I come back stronger, more grateful, more emotional, more grounded, and more confused and more understanding. And it's almost like all of these things all happen in one go. And maybe that's why I keep going. Maybe I keep going because I want to see the new version of me. And I know that Afghanistan changes me every single time. No matter how emotionally challenging and how emotionally difficult it is, it reminds me of what matters in life. And it reminds me of humanity. It reminds me of gratitude. It reminds me of resilience. Like, Afghans are some of the most resilient individuals I have ever met in my life. It reminds me of how much people can love and give even if they have so little. The beauty that exists within us if we accept it, even from people and a country that has suffered so much. This time in particular, it's going to be so different for me. And I am so excited for me because I am going back such a different version of who I was last year. The last time I went will be almost 12 months. I remember the broken version of me that went June 2025. Came back to basically an entire different life, an entire different way of living, an entire different person. And my life basically turned upside down just before I went to Afghanistan. And I came back and I have spent the entire year becoming me and like finding me. And I think that's what this whole YouTube channel was all about from the get-go, about finding me, coming back to me, just accepting and taking you along for the journey. And I think this time round, for the first time, I'm actually going to document everything properly. Not just the charity work, not just the distributions and all of the emotions that come with that, but everything behind the scenes, from what I feel like emotionally, from my experiences, from my emotions. I want you guys to see Afghanistan through my eyes. That's what you're gonna do if you want. That's what's gonna happen if you want to come along for the journey. And I also want to show you the beauty of Afghanistan while you get to see the heartbreaking charity side by side. I think Afghanistan deserves to be seen so much more than just the suffering. There is so much beauty and there's so much love in Afghanistan. It deserves to be seen through the humanity, the warmth, the hospitable people, the resilience. And I know this time round, however emotional I feel about going, I know I'll come back a changed person. And I don't know what that change is going to look like, but I'm here for it. And I guess these are my reflections before going. So when I come back, I guess I'll do my reflections coming back. Afghanistan genuinely always changes me, and it's something I have to mentally prepare myself for because I never know what it's going to bring. And I have to be honest, as rewarding as charity operations are, it is also some of the most heartbreaking experiences you will ever have to encounter. Because seeing children that should be in school on the streets barefoot, trying to make enough money to take bread home for dinner, seeing people your grandparents' age out there trying to make enough money to take dinner home, seeing disabled, amputated people trying to make enough money to take dinner home, like, it changes you. And I think so many of us think we know what that feels like because we watch it through our phones and we've seen the catastrophes throughout the world, and we think that we are ready and we have dealt with it emotionally. But through experience, I tell you, seeing that through a screen is very different to seeing that in front of your eyes. It's very different to being there and seeing that old man go home knowing he's made no sales that day and knowing that he probably is going to return with no food home. Seeing kids run around barefoot with such a big smile on their face, even though they haven't changed their clothes in weeks, or they don't even have means of showering. I remember when I went after Herat's earthquake, and we went to go see some of the people who'd lost their homes in the earthquake, and I would see where people would live, and it's literally like a tent and their entire belongings of like an entire family of like 6-7 people were inside, and the women didn't have means of even showering in private. They lived in a tent, and it's stuff that we don't understand because we don't see it. And it just reminds me so much of like, Alhamdulillah that we live such a privileged life. And so often we can get so confused and so distracted by how much privilege exists in our life that we take all of these things for granted. I know people see poverty online, but we see clips, we see documentaries, we see everything on social media. But I promise you, seeing it with your own eyes changes you. Like, I genuinely remember the first time we went to the school and there was these little kids who were so excited to speak to me in English. They were literally coming up to me, teaching me the alphabet, right, in English, because they'd learnt the alphabet in English, and they had this like script that they'd written, and they were like so proud, so happy that they finally have someone that they can speak to fluently in English. And it was like an experience that it's almost like you never get over it and never changes you. I remember we were on the streets and all these kids were running up to us, or like I said, apparently you look like a foreigner, and all these kids were running up to you and they were like khala khala paisa, which basically means like auntie can I have money, right? And like you look at them and they don't have shoes and they've got ripped clothes and they look like they haven't had a shower in God knows how long, and sometimes your heart just breaks and you're just like, you should be children. You should be allowed to just be children. Like having children that look so malnourished, who are out there, like kids, like I am talking 4-5-year-old kids. They're out there smiling, but at the same time hustling to try and make money and take home dinner. And I think even now when I think about it, it is so emotional and so difficult because it's not what I'm used to. And I know I would go people who live in Afghanistan and it kind of wouldn't bother them. And because that is what was normal to them, that's something they see on a daily basis. But when you live in the West and you don't see that, it's things that changes you. Like genuinely, when I tell you, the first time I went to Afghanistan has changed me in a way that I cannot even put into words. But it's also done a lot of aside from breaking my heart and all of that, it has done a lot of very powerful, humbling things. Like we take so much of our lives for granted in the West. Sometimes I sit there and I think about my job and I'm like, oh, I don't earn enough money. I don't live in a nice enough house. I don't have a nice enough car. Or I don't go on enough holidays. And then I go to Afghanistan and then I think about all of these things that I classify as goals in my life. And I'm like, this little kid's goal is to take dinner home, so his mum and his sisters have something to eat. And my goal is to get a better job so I can have a nicer house. And I think it's so difficult living the life that we live and not carrying that guilt. And part of me lives with that guilt because I also don't know how to get rid of it, if I am completely honest. I go to Afghanistan, and the last time when I went, when it was just after the Herat earthquakes, I saw this family, and it was very common, especially after the earthquakes, where an entire family of like 7 or 8 people were living out of a tent. No clean water, no hygiene, no facilities to actually shower in private, no heating, no stability, no privacy, no means of cooking, like nothing. And still at the same time so grateful. Like every time you talk to them, they're just like, Alhamdulillah. And I remember just thinking, like, this would never pass in the UK. We live such luxurious lives in comparison that we couldn't even fathom that this is how other people live. The other thing that is so sad is how normalized it's become to both people. People who live in Afghanistan, how normalized it's become to them that the people I was traveling with, it wasn't bothering them. And I guess you have to become like that because that is your day-to-day, and otherwise it would affect you so much that you wouldn't be able to survive. And I get that, but I think also how normalized it's come to people in the West, where we can scroll past these things that we see on social media, where you can see, like, I would see people my grandparents' age begging on the streets. I would see children who should be in school begging on the streets. I would see children cleaning shoes, doing things that you can't even imagine. Women trying to survive such impossible, horrible situations because they have no other means of money. They have no other means of survival. They don't have a stable state system that will give them funding if they are means tested, because let's be honest, the vast majority of the country would qualify, and the country doesn't have facilities like that. And I think as an empath, I absorb everything. I absorb every emotion that people feel. I absorb all of the pain, and I would carry it home with me every single time. Literally every single night I would cry because it would hurt me so much, because I feel this overwhelming responsibility that I don't even know how to resolve. I genuinely know that I probably feel more responsibility than is natural or that is possible for me to deal with. But it's this thing that I really struggle with, because every time I go to Afghanistan, I'm like, I wish I had unlimited money. I wish my resources were not finite. I wish I didn't have to choose between the elderly granddad and the young child, and who I have enough money to give to. And then I carry it home with me. I carry it home with me back to London, and it changes me, and it makes me such an emotional and a sad person, but at the same time, it makes me so grateful, and it makes me so humble. And when I tell you it changes me, I don't think you'll know what that change is unless you ever experience it. And I think that's why going to Afghanistan is so challenging, because I know that is how I'm going to feel. I know that is my experience, what it's going to be like. So it's almost like I have to emotionally prepare myself for all of that. I have to emotionally prepare myself for all of the pain, because it's not a holiday. It's more than just a charity project. It's literally emotional exposure, seeing humanity at some of its most heartbreaking situations, and learning to do what you can and not let it completely engulf you. I don't know. I think Afghanistan makes me so humble, and like genuinely reminds me of how many privileges I have in life. And sometimes social media makes us feel poor. Sometimes social media makes me compare and forget how deeply privileged I am. We compare ourselves to influencers and people who live luxury lifestyles that are way beyond our tax brackets. And we forget how blessed we truly are. Having safety is a privilege. Having clean water is a privilege. Having a roof over my head is a privilege. Having stability, having income, having a job, having family, all of these things are privileges. But yeah, at the same time, it's bare minimum. But it's bare minimum to us in the West, and it's not bare minimum to other people in different countries. And I think it also just reminds me of why United Globally matters so much to me. And there are so many times where I genuinely have sat there and I've thought, what's the point? We're tiny, we don't have funding, I don't have a massive team. Everything is so difficult. And it's so emotionally engulfing as well, because I mean, the finances aside, just the thought of feeling responsible for supporting those in Afghanistan. But then I think every time I go to Afghanistan, I just see what a pound can do. Something so simple, like a pound can get someone who has not eaten a hot meal. In case you haven't seen, go watch my video about the actual deployment. And just thinking about things, the amount that I probably spend on a dinner in the UK would be enough to provide dinner for a month for a family. And then it puts that back into perspective for you. Like, yes, of course, running a charity is exhausting. Doing everything for Unite Globally is exhausting because it is so small and we lack so much funding. But at the same time, it matters. At the same time, every time I go to Afghanistan and we give someone cash or we give someone a meal, it just reminds me of how simple something like a smile and how much that means to me. And regardless of how tiring and how exhausting and how hurt I get by the lack of support when it comes to Unite Globally, like that smile is enough to keep me going. And like I said, I think this journey, however emotionally scared I am also very excited for the new version of me that always arises from it. I'm very excited to see how I change as a person and to see what that change is going to look like for me. And I want to take you along for the journey entirely this time. Like from the beginning when we leave from London up until we return to London, I want to take you guys along for the journey. So I'm going to turn into like an official vlogger. We'll obviously be doing a charity distribution for like a week or so, which we will obviously take you along for. But even the other stuff, I want you to see the beauty of Afghanistan. I want you to see the humanity and all of the beautiful parts that are often forgotten. I want you to see all of that. So, in case you haven't already, subscribe so you can see the rest of my journey. And I feel like that turned into like a really long rant, and I'm hoping you're here for it because that's what personal growth is all about. So welcome to the end of my personal growth and my personal reflections with Nadia Majidi when it comes to going Afghanistan. I will come back when I'm back and let's see how I feel then. But once again, if you didn't know, we are going mid-June and I will leave the QR code on screen, maybe here at some point now. And then I will also put a link in all my social media platforms where you can access it. If you want to contribute, you can do so. Thanks.